The transit pod smelled like recycled air and something that had once been food. Nora Voss had been sitting in it for 11 hours. Her bag was too heavy, her neck hurt, and the academy orientation packet she was supposed to have memorized was still folded in her jacket pocket, unread. She was not nervous. She had grown up on Kessler Colony, a pressurized mining station where the walls groaned at night and the safety drills were not drills. Nervousness was a luxury. You were either paying attention or you weren't. The pod docked with a soft clang. The doors opened. The Galactic Coalition Academy was enormous. It sat in orbital space above the gas giant Thurvek, a ring-shaped station with 17 blocks, 4 training floors, 2 simulation wings, and approximately 2,000 students from 41 different species. Nora knew this because it was on the first page of the orientation packet, which she had read exactly that far. She stepped out of the pod with her bag on one shoulder and looked at the corridor map on the wall. Block 7. That was where her dormitory was. The map showed 3 routes. She picked the middle one because it looked shortest. It was not the shortest. 20 minutes later, she was in a maintenance junction corridor that was definitely not on the map, and the ceiling was low, and the lights were the dim amber of a section not designed for regular foot traffic. She stopped, turned around, and found that the corridor behind her had a branching she had not noticed. She picked a direction. The corridor opened into a wider passage, and that was where she saw them. There were 6 Sulani students pressed against the left wall. They were compact beings, 4-eyed, with pale gray skin and nervous secondary eyelids that flickered when they were scared. All 6 pairs of secondary eyelids were flickering. They were not moving. They were barely breathing. In the center of the passage stood the Reason. He was enormous, 8 feet at least, maybe more. 4 arms, 2 held wide and 2 tucked close. His skin was dark and plated, natural armor running from his shoulders down to his forearms, and he was glowing. That was the only word for it. Pale blue and deep orange light pulsed across his chest and throat in repeating patterns, bright enough to throw color onto the walls. The Solani students looked like they had forgotten how to be alive. Nora looked at the scene. She processed it as a crowd in the corridor. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward. The glowing thing turned. It was a face. A Drakthari face, she thought, though she had only seen pictures. Heavy brow, wide jaw, 4 eyes arranged in a slight arc. The bioluminescent pattern shifted when he looked at her. The blue deepened. The orange spread wider. It was, objectively, a threat display. She had read about those too, somewhere, at some point. The display hit her at full intensity. She squinted. The patterns were actually quite detailed up close. The orange moved in slow pulses from the center of his chest outward, and the blue ran in thinner lines along his collar and jaw like something electrical. It was almost symmetrical, but not quite, which made it more interesting to look at. "That's actually pretty cool," Nora said. The corridor was very quiet. The Drakthari did not move. The glow continued, but something in it seemed uncertain, like a speaker mid-sentence who had forgotten the next word. Nora shifted her bag on her shoulder. "Do you know where Block 7 is? I've been walking for a while, and I think I went the wrong way at the junction." He said nothing. She waited. He kept not saying anything. The Solani students had gone very still in a new way, less like prey animals and more like people watching something they did not understand and were not sure was safe to watch. "Okay," Nora said. "Maybe you don't speak standard. That's fine." She looked past him at the far end of the corridor. There was a direction sign on the wall. She could not read it from here. "I'm just going to check that sign. Sorry for interrupting." She walked past him, not around him, past him, through the space between him and the center of the corridor. She was close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his plating. She glanced at the sign. Block 7 was left at the next junction. "Got it," she said, to no one in particular. "Thanks." She went left at the junction and disappeared from view. For a long moment, nothing moved in the corridor. Then one of the Solani students made a very small sound. It was not a word. It was the kind of sound made when something happens that has no category yet. The Drakthari stood in the center of the passage. His name was Grawl. He had been at the academy for 3 years. In that time, no student had walked toward him during a full display. No student had spoken to him without their voice shaking. No student had turned their back on him and walked away like he was furniture. His bioluminescence faded slowly. The blue last, then the orange, until the corridor was just amber maintenance lighting again. He looked at the junction where the human had turned left. He did not have a word for what he was feeling. His species had many words for dominance and submission and the gradations between them. They did not have a word for this. He walked away in the other direction. Behind him, the 6 Sulani students slowly peeled themselves off the wall. One of them, a smaller male named Reth, stared at the empty junction for a long time. He needed to find out who that was. Reth found out her name by checking the new enrollment list, which took 4 minutes. He found out her origin by cross-referencing the student registry with Coalition Colony records, which took 9. He found out what Kessler Colony was by reading the Hazard Index entry, which was quite long and had a fatality statistics table that he read twice. He was not sure if this explained everything or nothing. Her name was Nora Voss. She was 19. She was enrolled in the dual-track combat theory and xenobiology program, which was the hardest combined program at the academy, and had a dropout rate of 63% by the 2nd month. She was from a pressurized extraction colony on the outer belt of a system with no habitable planets, where the nearest emergency medical facility was an 18-hour transit away. Reth was from Sulan. Sulan had excellent hospitals, mild weather, and public transit that ran on time. He had been afraid of the dark until he was 12. He found Nora in the meal hall the next morning, sitting alone at the end of a long table, eating something from a bowl and reading an actual paper document. He sat down across from her with his tray and said, "You walked past Grawl yesterday." She looked up. "Is that his name?" "Yes, he is Drakthari. They are the apex predator species of the Varak system. They have been in the coalition for 40 years, and they are still in the top 5 most dangerous species by individual combat assessment." Reth paused. "He has been at this academy for 3 years. No one challenges him." Nora considered this. "I didn't challenge him. I asked him for directions. He was in full threat display. I know. It was impressive." She went back to her bowl. "I didn't know I was supposed to run." Reth opened his mouth and then closed it. This was, he was beginning to understand, going to be a recurring experience around this person. They sat in silence for a while. Then, because he had no other option, and she was the only person who had ever walked away from Grail and looked bored doing it, Reth started explaining how the academy worked, the social structure, the unspoken rules, which corridors Grawl used in the mornings, which tables in the meal hall were his by default. Nora listened. She nodded at the useful parts. When he finished, she said, "So basically everyone just agreed to be scared of him. It is not quite that simple. He is genuinely dangerous." "I'm sure he is." She folded the paper document and put it in her pocket. "So is a pressure seal failure. You just deal with it." Reth thought about this for several days. 3 weeks into the semester, Instructor Pello announced the paired simulation exercise. Pello was a Varani. He had 6 limbs, a tendency to click his mandibles when annoyed, and a deep, genuine love for combat theory that had been slowly worn down over 3 years by the fact that his best-resourced student spent class time performing dominance displays instead of learning anything. Palo was not afraid of Growl the way the students were. He was afraid in a quieter, more administrative way. The kind of afraid that made you not call on someone and not assign them partners and let the problem continue because the alternative required paperwork and confrontation and possibly medical attention. Today, for reasons Reth later described as cosmically cruel, the random assignment algorithm paired Nora with Grail. The simulation floor went quiet. Instructor Pello looked at his tablet for a long moment, then looked up, then looked back at the tablet as if hoping the names had changed. They had not. Growl stood at his starting position. He was looking at Nora with his full posture engaged, weight forward, forearms slightly spread, the particular stillness of a predator that has chosen a target. Every other student had shifted back from the floor boundary without being asked. Nora stood at her starting position and waited for the exercise to begin. She rolled one shoulder. The joint popped. She rolled it again. Pelos signaled the start. Grawl moved fast. He was genuinely fast. Faster than something his size had any right to be, and his opening strike was designed to end the exercise immediately. Nora was not there when it landed. She had stepped left and slightly back, not with any particular grace, but with the flat practicality of someone who had learned to move in narrow spaces without thinking about it. She did not try to match his strength. She never tried that. She worked angles, worked distance, made him turn and turn again. He was stronger and faster, and she knew it. She was not trying to win by overpowering him. She was trying to win by being somewhere he wasn't. She did not win. He caught her in the third rotation and it ended. She hit the floor, registered the impact, and lay there for a second, taking stock. Nothing broken. Fine. What happened next was the part that bothered Grell for days afterward. She stood up, and while she was brushing the floor grit off her sleeve, she looked at the way he was holding his lower left arm and said, "Your grip is wrong on that side. You're pulling through the elbow instead of the shoulder. You'd get more force if you rotated here." She tapped her own shoulder to show the joint she meant. Grail stared at her. "It's just more efficient," she said. "You'd hit harder." She walked off the floor to get water. The simulation was over. She had lost. She seemed mildly inconvenienced. Grail stood in the center of the floor and felt, for the second time in 3 weeks, a thing he did not have a word for. The notes started appearing on the 8th day after the simulation exercise. The first one was on Nora's dormitory door, a strip of material pressed flat against the panel, text in 2 galactic scripts. She peeled it off, looked at it, and brought it to Reth at breakfast. He read it. His secondary eyelids flickered twice. "What does it say?" she asked. Reth set it down. "It says you should transfer programs." She picked it back up and put it in her jacket. "What's the other script?" "The same message. In Drakthari formal script." He paused. "Formal script is used for serious communications." "Okay." She stirred her food. "Can you teach me to read it?" Reth stared at her. "You want to learn Drakthari script? If I'm going to keep getting notes, I'd rather not need a translator." That was the first note. There were 6 more over the following 10 days. Different locations. Her workstation in the study corridor. The locker assigned to her in the combat theory annex. Tucked under the edge of her meal tray while she was away getting water, which meant someone had been close enough to touch her things while she wasn't looking. She kept them all in a folder. She labeled the folder with a date and the word documentation in capital letters, the way her shift supervisors on Kessler used to label incident reports. On the 12th day, she went to her workstation in the open lab and found the screen cracked. Not accidentally. The damage pattern was deliberate, pressure applied from above, the kind that required significant force. Her research work for the xenobiology module was stored on it. 18 hours of notes. She looked at the damage for a moment. She was annoyed, not afraid. Annoyed. She filed a station maintenance request, checked the backup system, confirmed her work had been auto-saved 4 hours ago, and went to the equipment lending office to get a temporary replacement unit. It took 40 minutes. She lost 4 hours of work. She stayed up late to redo it. Reth found out about the workstation the next morning. He appeared at her side in the corridor with the particular energy of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation. "You need to report this," he said. "To who?" "Administration. Instructor Pello. The station safety office. Someone." "And then what?" "And then..." She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way you say something you have already thought through. Administration on an orbital station runs slow. Oversight of student disputes runs slower. By the time anything happened, the semester would be over. Reth clicked his teeth together, which was his equivalent of a sigh. "Then you need to transfer." "I'm not transferring." She shifted her bag. "I like my program." He followed her down the corridor. "Nora, he broke your equipment. He knows where your locker is. He knows where you sit in the lab. This is not just intimidation anymore." "It was always intimidation. Breaking my equipment is still intimidation. It's just louder." She stopped at her new route junction. She had changed her morning path 3 days ago, rerouted away from the corridors Reth had identified as Grail's usual hours. "He wants me to do something, run or yell or go to authority and make noise. I'm not going to do any of those things." Reth was quiet. "I grew up somewhere where the danger was real," she said. "Not personal, not directed at me specifically, just real. The walls could fail. The seals could go. You made a plan and you executed the plan and you didn't spend energy on the fear part because the fear part didn't help." She looked at him. "He's loud and he's big and he has friends. That's not the worst environment I've been in." Reth did not have a response to that either. That afternoon, Nora was called to the small office on level 2, where the human liaison officer worked. She had known the office existed but had not yet had reason to visit. The officer was a woman named Commander Sova. She was older, late 50s maybe, with close-cut gray hair and the kind of posture that came from decades of not relaxing in professional spaces. She did not offer Nora anything to sit on. She was already sitting when Nora arrived, and she looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not unfriendly but was very attentive. "How are you finding the academy?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Good," Nora said. "The xenobiology track is harder than I expected. In a good way. And otherwise." Nora looked at her. Sova looked back. There was a folder on the desk between them. Nora could not see what was in it, but she had some ideas. "Fine," Nora said. Sova was quiet for a moment. She had very still eyes, the kind that had seen enough things that they did not widen for small surprises anymore. "Yeah," Sova said. "I thought so." She made a small gesture toward the door. That was apparently the end of the meeting. Nora walked back to the main level through the central atrium. It was the open-air section of the station, a wide vaulted space with plants and benches, the kind of place designed to remind you that the walls were not closing in. She did not look over her shoulder. Across the atrium, from a second-level walkway, Graal watched her go. He had expected her to look afraid coming out of the liaison office. He had expected something. Running. A change in posture. Some visible effect of the pressure. She walked like she always walked. Straight. Unhurried. Like nothing was behind her. He gripped the railing tighter. She should have been gone by now. The meal hall was at peak capacity on seventh-day evenings. Every student ate at the same time because the kitchen rotation ran on a fixed schedule, and the hall was loud with 2,000 beings making the sounds of 2,000 different species eating. It was the most public space on the station. Everyone passed through it. Everyone could see everything. Nora was halfway through something the kitchen called a grain mix. Tasted like seasoned cardboard, but had good protein numbers. Reth was across from her, explaining a calculation error in her xenobiology work. She was writing a correction in her notes. She heard the sound first. Not dramatic, just a large body moving through a room and other bodies going quiet as it passed. A spreading silence, table by table. She finished writing the correction. Graal stopped at the end of her table. He had 3 others with him. 2 Drakthari and 1 Craven, wide and low-built, with a hard outer shell. All of them were large. All of them were arranged in the specific formation of people who are not here by accident. Reth's hand went flat on the table. The hall was very quiet now. Not completely. There were still sounds from the far end where no one could quite see what was happening. But at this end, at the tables in a wide radius around Nora's, there was the silence of people who had stopped moving. Graal looked at Nora. She had looked up from her notes when he arrived. She was looking at him now with the calm, assessing expression she seemed to use for most things. He leaned forward slightly and said, in Standard, clear and loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, that she had been at the academy long enough to understand what she was doing, that she had disrupted things that did not belong to her, that if she had any intelligence at all, she would be on the next transit pod out of this station, and she would not look back. He said it with the full weight of 3 years of authority behind it. He said it as a fact, not a threat. The kind of statement that closes a conversation. Nora set down her pen. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" Nobody in the nearby radius breathed. "I grew up on a pressurized mining colony," she said. Her voice was conversational. Not loud, but the silence around her carried it. "Kessler Colony. Outer Belt. 412 people. The station was 40 years old when I was born, and it had never been fully refitted. We ran pressure checks twice a day because if we missed one and a seal went while people were in the outer shafts, they didn't come back." She paused. "The fatality rate when I was growing up was about 12% per year. Not from accidents only. From the environment. The station itself, just existing, was trying to kill us all the time." Graal had not moved. He had not expected her to speak. "I was 14 when a collapse trapped me and 2 co-workers in a maintenance shaft. Not a drill. Real. The lights failed in the first hour. We had one communicator that only worked in short bursts. We did not know if anyone was coming." She looked at him steadily. "I was in that shaft for 11 hours. One of the people with me was injured. I kept him awake by talking. We did not know if the remaining supports would hold. We did not know if the air recycler would last. Nobody at the nearby tables had moved. They found us," she said. "We came out. That was fine. But I'm telling you that story because you asked me a question, even if you didn't say it like a question. You want to know why I am not afraid of you." She picked up her pen again. "I know what it feels like to be actually scared. Real scared. The kind where you do not know if you are going to be alive in the morning, and there is nothing you can do about it. I've felt that. I know what it is." She looked at him one more time. "This is not that." She went back to her notes. The grain mix was cold now. She ate it anyway. Grail stood at the end of the table. The 3 who had come with him were very still. They were looking at him. He was looking at Nora, who was writing in her margin again, her pen moving in small, careful strokes. He had a response prepared. He had used it before in different confrontations over 3 years. It worked on the fear response, the urgency that lived in every species at the base of everything. He could not find the entry point for it. She was not suppressing fear. She was not being brave in the way that meant frightened, but pushing through. She was genuinely somewhere else. The category he lived in simply had no slot for her. He looked at his allies. They were waiting for direction. He turned and walked away from the table. No declaration, no escalation, just the act of leaving, which was the only thing left to do. Behind him, the hall began to breathe again, slowly, quietly, then more. Reth looked at Nora. She was still writing. She did not look up for another full minute, and when she did, it was only to check the correction she had made earlier. "You were saying," she said to Reth, "that I carried the decimal wrong." He stared at her. "The decimal," she said, "in my xenobiology work." Reth swallowed. "Yes," he said, "you carried it wrong. Show me." He showed her. By the next morning, everyone had heard. Not everyone had been in the meal hall, but the ones who were had told the ones who weren't, and by the time the first classes of the day began, the story had moved through the student population the way anything moves through a closed station, fast and changed slightly at each stop, but with the core of it still intact. A human had spoken to Growl, not run, not submitted, not transferred, had looked at him and spoken. The part people repeated most was the last moment, Growl walking away and Nora going back to her notes. Different species told it differently. The Sulani students added detail. The Craven students compressed it into a single flat statement. One group of Varani students in the upper science track had a 7-minute debate about what it meant structurally for social hierarchies in closed environments. What it meant, in practical terms, started showing up over the next 4 days. Small things. A group of Sulani students sat at a table that had been, by unspoken agreement, Grail's nearest buffer zone, the empty ring of tables that surrounded his preferred area. They sat there, ate quickly, and left. Nothing happened. 2 days after that, a Craven student spoke during a section of combat theory where Graal was present. She had never spoken in that section before, though she was one of the best in the class. Instructor Pello called on her, and she answered, and her voice was only slightly unsteady. Nothing happened. The buffer zones shrank, not gone, but smaller. The empty table radius reduced from 4 rows to 2. Students stopped rerouting their paths through the atrium when Graal was crossing it. They walked anyway, on the other side of the wide space. But they walked. Graal noticed all of it. He responded by applying harder pressure to the students closest to him. 2 Sulani students in his extended social orbit suddenly found their study materials interfered with. A Craven student who had spoken in class had a locker incident. The pressure came down heavier than before, and for those individuals it was worse, and they fell back. But the edges did not fall back. The outer ring, the students who had been at the margins of his influence, they did not return to where they had been. One crack was not the wall falling, but it was a crack. Reth noticed all of this in the way Reth noticed things, by building a mental chart of behavioral patterns and updating it daily. He told Nora about it one morning, talking fast, because he had been saving it up. The social pressure map has changed, he said. Not completely, but the outer zones are no longer stable for him. He is applying more force to the inner zones to compensate, but that costs him. Force applied inward means he cannot apply it outward. Nora nodded. She was fixing a strap on her bag. You understand what you did, Reth said. I ate my food, she said. You changed the math, he said. Everyone here knew theoretically that he was one individual, one very large, very dangerous individual. But knowing something theoretically and believing it are different. You walking away made it real. She looked at him. I didn't do it to make a point. I know, he said. That's the part that made it work. On the 6th day after the meal hall confrontation, Graal found her alone. It was a corridor on level 4, near the xenobiology labs. Not a maintenance junction. A regular corridor, reasonably lit, just empty at this hour because most students had evening meal and the labs were closed. She was heading back from a late session. He was standing in the middle of the corridor. She stopped, not because she was afraid, because he was in the way. He looked at her. He was not in threat display. The bioluminescence was quiet. You have broken something, he said. His standard was precise. She had not heard him speak in full sentences before. His voice was low and resonant, like sound coming from deeper than a chest should go. I haven't broken anything, she said. I've just been here. The structure was stable, he said. What I built here, it worked. Everyone knew their position. There was no confusion. There was a lot of fear, she said. Fear is structure, he said. Fear tells everyone where they are. She looked at him for a moment. He was, she noticed, genuinely upset. Not performing, not escalating. Actually explaining himself, which was its own strange thing to witness. Can I ask you something? She said. He waited. Why do you need them to be afraid? What does that give you? He was quiet. The question had not been hostile. It had been what it sounded like. A question. It gives certainty, he said finally. I know where I stand. They know where they stand. That's not certainty, she said. That's control. They're different things. She shifted her bag. Where I come from, she said. You couldn't control the environment. You never could. The station was old. The equipment was old. Things went wrong. So you learned to know where you stood by what you could do, not by whether everything around you was scared of you. She looked at him. Fear is just information. It tells you where the danger is. It doesn't tell you who you are. She walked past him, not around him. Past. He did not move to stop her. He stood in the corridor alone for a long time after she was gone, looking at the wall ahead of him, and for the first time in 3 years, he was not thinking about the academy's social structure at all. He was thinking about what she had said. The semester did not end dramatically. It ended the way most semesters end, with assessments, deadlines, and the low-grade exhaustion of people who have been working hard for a long time. The kitchen switched to a simplified menu in the final 2 weeks. The simulation floors ran double sessions. The corridors smelled like recycled stress. Nora finished her xenobiology module with a grade in the top 8% of her cohort. Her combat theory score was not as strong, but it was solid, and Instructor Pilo had noted in her written assessment that her tactical adaptability was among the best in the class. He had written that last part carefully, as if he was not quite sure it was allowed. The academy was different, not transformed, not fixed, but different. The buffer tables in the meal hall were down to a single row now. Students sat where they wanted more, often than not. In combat theory, Instructor Pilo ran his sessions the way he had always wanted to, with open questions, with students correcting each other, with the kind of productive disagreement that made the class actually function. He did this because the primary reason he had not done it before was now much quieter than he had been. Growl was still there, still physically imposing, still the kind of presence that made rooms aware of themselves. But the terror architecture, the specific learned response of students going still and small when he entered, had partially dissolved. Some students gave him space from genuine caution. Some gave him space from habit. Some did not give him extra space at all. A few, the ones who had been watching carefully, had noticed something else. Grail was in the training rooms more often than before, not during prime hours, late when the rooms were empty, working forms, not performing, not intimidating, drilling, with the specific private focus of someone who has found something to actually improve. No one said anything about it, but they noticed. Reth noticed. He told Nora. She nodded. She said, "Good." He looked at her. "That is your reaction? Just good?" "What else would I say?" "I do not know," Reth said. "Something more significant. You changed something real. People are different here because of you." Nora thought about this. She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was sometimes quiet. Not evasive, just actually thinking. "I didn't try to change anything," she said. "I tried to finish my program. I tried not to be somewhere I didn't belong. I tried to do good work." She picked up her fork. "If the room was going to change, it was going to change. I just didn't get out of the way of it." Reth considered this. "That is very calm," he said. "It's just honest," she said. He had known her for one semester. He suspected this was how she was going to be about everything, for the rest of whatever she did. He was not sure whether that was exhausting or reassuring, possibly both. On the last day before semester break, Commander Sova called her in again. The office was the same. Sova was the same posture, same still eyes. There was tea this time. She offered Nora a cup and Nora took it. "You're staying for next semester," Sova said, not a question. "Yes." "Good." Sova held her own cup. "I've been doing this for 30 years, watching humans arrive at coalition institutions, watching how it goes." Nora waited. "Some of them arrive and they are very loud about being human. They make it a flag they carry. Every interaction is about proving something." Sova looked at her cup. "Some of them arrive and they become very small. They work so hard to fit that they stop being anything in particular." "And the others?" Nora said. "There are not many others," Sova said. "Maybe 4 in 30 years that I have watched do what you did." She looked up. "Which is just be themselves so completely that the room adjusts around them instead of the other way." Nora did not know what to say to that. It was probably the most she had ever heard Sova speak at once. "I didn't do anything," Nora said. "I know," Sova said. "That was the thing." Nora took the transit pod home for break. 11 hours again. The recycled air smell again. She slept for most of it. When she got back to Kessler Colony, her uncle asked her how the academy was. She said it was good. He asked if she had made any friends. She said yes, one, and he was very anxious, but good with numbers. Her uncle said that sounded like a reasonable person to know. She ate a meal that was not a grain mix, and slept in a bed that was the right size, and for 2 weeks she did not think about the academy at all. Across the station, in an empty training room on level 3, Grawl drilled the shoulder rotation she had shown him, the one that was more efficient, the one he had ignored for 3 years because he had not needed efficiency. He had needed size. He had needed fear. He ran the form again, cleaner this time. He could feel the difference. He ran it until it was right. Then he ran it again. Outside the small window at the end of the room, the gas giant Thurvek turned slowly in the dark, orange and gold and enormous, with no interest at all in the small lives spinning around it. It turned anyway, they all did.